recently shipped it last month. Yeah, so that's what I do. But both of these projects I've mentioned here are both examples of graphics programming. So what is graphics programming? Well, it's a sub-discipline within programming that focuses on the synthesis of images using computers, like mainly in games and film, like in the film industry. But it's also used in like the medical industry, the scientific visualization industry, the automotive industry, and so on. There's many applications for graphics, but I'm mainly interested in the game side. But yeah, that's games and films are quite a big area. So some common tasks done by a graphics programmer include trying to approximate the light interactions you see in real life, things like reflections, refractions, light bouncing, and so on, and also simulating real life phenomena like clouds or the ocean waves, or even like things like a camera lens or something like that. We do all of that stuff. And we also design algorithms to accelerate the rendering of images, so make things faster. We optimize games, we optimize like different algorithms and things like that. And these days, it's mostly done using GPUs, which is where we specialize in. Yeah, so and graphics is an example of what is called a niche area in software engineering. So according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it's like a niche is a place, an employment status, or activity for which a person or thing is best fitted. But in the context of software engineering, we can consider it as a highly specialized area of like programming or software engineering. Like as opposed to being like a generalized programmer who's going to work on like web or whatever, like the general technology. This is very specialized. So let's talk a bit about this and why you might want to find yourself a niche as well. So one of the best things about working in a niche area is that you have very little competition, because there's so few people working in this area that you have very little people to compete against. So, for example, there are very few graphics programmers in the world, but there are plenty of jobs in the games industry. There's so many, there's jobs in games, medicine, film, different industries. Therefore, there's a high demand. So that means like recruiters will come to you. You don't actually have to go and apply for jobs. People will come to you, and not the other way around, because there's so few people. There's a very strong demand for it. And because of this, these kinds of specialists, or like these kinds of specialist programmers, are compensated rather well because there's few. So you have more power when you want to bargain for your salaries, right? You have more power to like ask for a better compensation. But most of all, this kind of niche area is usually driven by passion, right? You wouldn't want to get into like a niche area just because it pays well, because it's a lot of hard work. Like you have to work years and years to get into like a specialist area, and you only do it out of passion. And because you're doing it out of passion, it'll be very satisfying once you actually get to work on it. Like, for example, I work in games, and like ever since I was a kid, I was a big fan of video games, and like now I get to work with people who worked on games that I played as a kid. I was like, wow, like I get to work on these like rock star programmers. Like they're like rock stars to me because I got to play games that they made while I was a kid. So like I get to work on that kind of stuff, and I get to work on games that I like, sequels to games that I used to play as a kid, things like that. So it's very satisfying. So it's very rewarding, like being in a niche area like this. However, there's a couple of disadvantages, but if you are looking to switch to a different area of software, of the software world, which has nothing in common, you will have to start from the beginning, because you would have spent so many years trying to hone this one particular skill that you will have ignored every other like part of the industry. Like I have no idea about web technologies. Like I don't know what Node.js or whatever is. I don't know what Angular is. I don't know any of this stuff. But I know a very specific skill set. Like I have a very specific low-level graphics skill set, which keeps me employed. And there's plenty of jobs for that. So that is the disadvantage. You can't be a you're like generalist programmer. You have to specialize and you have to commit to it. So you have to choose your profession very carefully. And also, getting into like a specific area like this requires a lot of knowledge. Some of these fields might require like a master's degree or a PhD or something like that. But in the case with graphics, it's all about self-study. So you have to learn all the techniques, the graphics techniques, the theory, the technologies, and like the programming languages and all this stuff you have to learn by yourself. And in graphics, they don't really care about like whether you have a degree or not, because the educational requirement is only a concern if you want to get into academia. Like if you want to publish papers and that kind of thing, you sometimes you might need to have like a master's or something. But apart from that, you really don't need to. But it really depends on the area. Like some other areas like AI or like machine learning, that kind of thing, that's not my area. I don't know what the requirements are for that. It could be different. But in my case, I didn't need to have a PhD or a master's. Just having my own self-taught knowledge was enough. So yeah, you have to work very hard to get into this kind of specialization. So that might be a disadvantage. But if you like to learn, it's totally fine. So now I can go over my own personal journey of getting into the graphics industry. So typically, becoming a specialist of any kind is not really like a straightforward journey, right? Like you can't really get there in one go. And I think it's true for most industries. Like if you want to become a specialist, it's kind of a hard journey to get there. And it's especially true for us in the third world countries, like in Sri Lanka or India or whatever. We don't have the same opportunities that people in the West have. So we have to work even harder. For example, like in my case, like in graphics, you have like internship positions in game studios or like AMD or whatever in the US and in Europe, but they will not hire people from Asia because like for example from Sri Lanka, because they would have to sponsor a visa, which is kind of a not a worthy investment for them to sponsor someone who's just going to be there for 6 months or something like that. So there's less opportunities for us, whereas for them they can specialize in this area from the very beginning. While they are still in university, they can get an internship and then work their way. Like if you get an internship, the chances are good that you can get back into like a full-time position after you graduate. It's not the case for us. We have to build up our portfolio. We have to get really good, and then we have to apply for a full-time position. So this journey usually contains a few twists and turns for us. So each detour in this path represents a career move that you will have to make. And ideally, these moves should bring you closer to your end goal, which could be like your dream job, which in my case was working in like AAA PC console level graphics for games. That was my goal as a kid. Like I really wanted to work on those kinds of games, the games that I played. So before we actually embark on this journey, we have to figure out what the destination is, meaning like what is our job? What is our passion? What are we passionate about? So in my case, I had not touched programming until I started Slit in 2014. Like I think I probably did IT for O-levels, but maybe I touched some HTML, but I didn't really know anything about programming. I was curious about computers. I knew I wanted to do something related to software engineering, but I didn't have a clue about what it was. But I had an interest in video games. Like I played a lot of video games. My mother yelled at me constantly growing up, playing too many video games and not studying. She had taken my keyboard, my mouse many, many times while I was studying for O-levels and A-levels. And yeah, I mean, that was a common thing. So like I love video games and I love graphics. Like as a kid, I would look at the graphics menus and I would like tweak the texture quality settings and the like the post processing effects and the stuff, just to check what they actually do. And I would, I'd be very curious about that kind of thing. So I had a vague idea that I wanted to work in the games industry. but I didn't actually like start doing anything until my very good friend called Sithila. He lives in Australia. He's a gameplay programmer who he works with Unreal Engine, and he introduced me to Unreal Engine 3 back in 2013, and he showed me some tutorials. So I spent some time like doing those tutorials, and I really liked what I was doing, and I knew that I wanted to work in the game development scene. But the thing with the games industry is that it's entirely made up of specialists. You have like character artists or level artists or like prop artists, creature artists. You have engine programmers, physics programmers, graphics programmers, like audio, animation programmers. There's so many different specializations. There's very little room for a general programmer. It's mostly like specializations because you're trying to build a big like beast from scratch, right? You're building an engine, you're building a game, like it's all very specific stuff. So I still hadn't figured out what my like specialization was. Like I was still playing around with Unreal Engine, like I was having fun, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I think I started out doing like level design, like I built levels, made little games and stuff. It was fun at first, but then I realized like that was not for me. Like I'm more of a programmer. I'm not an artist, so I'm very bad at art. Like I can draw a little bit, but I wouldn't say I'm good enough to be a professional. My brain works like a programmer's. So after that, I just took a step back from game development related things, and I focused more on my band because I used to play in a band for like 10 years. I played in various concerts and stuff. And like during my first 2 years at Slate, I was very focused on my music and I was playing in a band constantly, all that stuff. So like I focused on that and I stepped back from game development for a while. So then in 2015, Epic released Unreal Engine 4 with a free license. And my friend that I mentioned in the previous slide, he started working on this and he started to share screenshots and stuff, which made me excited. I'm like, oh, like, it's like sparked that interest in game development once again. So I looked up some tutorials for Unreal Engine 4. And while doing those, I realized my C++, like not like my skills in C++ was completely lacking. Like I didn't even know what a pointer was, basically. I didn't understand any of the concepts. Like I wasn't fully like, skilled in C++ because Unreal Engine 4 uses C++ as the scripting language. So I wanted to brush up on my C++ skills, like outside of Unreal Engine. So I remembered this thing called OpenGL, and I was curious to know what that was because I heard it was related to graphics. And in case you don't know, OpenGL is a graphics API that is used to communicate with the GPU to draw 3D graphics. And it's one of the things used by games. Anyways, after some Googling, I found this absolutely fantastic website called learnopengl.com, which taught me like OpenGL from the scratch. Basically, that website will teach you graphics programming from the very beginning to all the way to like quite advanced techniques, which you can technically create your own game engine with those skills, like a very basic game engine with those skills. It's a very good website. So I thought it was a great way to learn C++ as well as to learn a new technology. So like gaining a new skill, basically. So I started following those tutorials. My daily routine was so this was in second year. So I take the 177 bus from Kotte to Malapi to Slit, and from Slit, from Slit back home, like I would read the tutorial on my phone, and then I would come back home. I would start up Visual Studio, and I would code the whole thing all night, and I would get it running. And I did that every day. Like I would go to uni, come back home, and code the thing. So I did that for all the lessons, and I finished all the tutorials. It took me a few months, but I did everything. And I ended up writing a little game, like a graphics engine. Then I really knew that this was my calling, like because it was very satisfying to do, and I was thinking about it all the time, and it was giving me various different like ideas about things that I could try. like, yeah, that really gave that spark in my head. Like when I saw that first triangle on the screen, I was like, this is amazing. And yeah, like the positive, like it like really unlocked a bunch of new things in my brain. So yeah, so all this happened during the second year of SLIT. When third year came around, I switched to the weekend lectures so I could take a stab at working in the industry. So coincidentally, at the same time, the only Sri Lankan game studio at the time was called Dawn Patrol Games. They were hiring a C++ programmer for porting a PlayStation 4 game to an a Android-powered console called the Ouya. I don't know if you remember it, but it was a terrible console which failed miserably. It was not a good console. It was a complete failure. Anyways, I applied there and I interviewed, and we had it was a pretty good graphics heavy conversation, and I passed it. Like they asked a lot of graphics questions, and I passed all of it, and I got the job offer, which I accepted, and I was very excited. And then the day before, before my start date, I get an email saying that the company went out of business and they shut down. So I was very gutted. I was so disappointed. But then SLIT came to the rescue because they had sent our CVs out to a few local companies, and I got a call from one of those, and it was called Fidance Technologies. So they are like they used to be like a small startup that focused more on like mobile and web development for foreign clients. They did a lot of like outsourced work, and that is my first job in the software industry. I started working there as a trainee, and I think I got up to associate software engineer by the time I left. I worked mostly on the iOS apps. So I did started with Objective-C, then I did Swift, switched to Swift. And by the time towards the end, I was also working on Android apps with Java. So I think I got to work on 12 different apps, which all shipped on, I think, the Play Store and the App Store, which was very good. So it's a very good experience. It wasn't graphics, it wasn't graphics related at all. But I learned a ton of valuable, lots of valuable lessons, like how the software industry actually works, what it's like to work with a team, like project management, and actually shipping software to customers, because that's what matters at the end of the day, right? Because there's a whole process that you have to go, like QA, and even things like using version control systems like Git or something, because doing that by yourself is different to working on a bigger team. You have merge reviews, and you have to fix merge conflicts. There's things which you won't be exposed to as a student, some things in the industry, right? So it was a good experience as a first time program, first job, basically. However, during this period, I spent all of my free time trying to learn more about graphics programming and working on my own little game engine. So I tried to find some screenshots from those projects, but all I could find were these two videos on YouTube that I uploaded long ago. You can try to find them if you want, but I made them so I could attach them to my CV. I cringe looking back at them because they look terrible to me now, but it was a good learning experience. I actually got to learn everything I know now because of those little projects. Yeah, it was basically like a little sandbox, graphics sandbox. And there was towards the end, I integrated a physics engine, and you could drive a little car around and stuff. Yeah, shadows, and it was an okay little project. That was my first attempt at making a little graphics engine. So that was what I was working on in that spare time. So things at this job were very comfortable, and I was getting a decent salary, and I could have stayed there for a long time. I could have gotten up to a senior or whatever. Things were very good. But I wanted to take a step towards getting closer to my goal of getting into graphics, right? So I got an email from this startup called Live Room, which was focused on graphics. and they were looking for someone to work on like a graphics engine that they were working on from an outsourced client. Um, and it was outside of my comfort zone because I was very comfortable at that last job, and this company was less. The building was less big, and it was like much smaller, and it was less like luxurious, let's say, because like the my last job was like more comfy, and I was happy in that place. But this was a little smaller, and like that, like I was felt like I was going backwards. But but like, I actually knew that I was making the right decision because it was giving me the chance to actually work on graphics related stuff. So I joined that startup. Like I interviewed them while I was still in my fourth year. Well, like while I was doing my final year project. So I did that, and I joined them after I finished the degree. That was before my graduation, but after I finished the degree in January of 2018, I joined Live, and I ended up becoming a graphics specialist there because I was the only one like who was like a graphics programmer at that company. So I had to consult on almost all the projects there. And I'm very thankful for that job because it gave me the chance to get like a real taste of professional graphics programming. That seemed to be the only job in the country which had that, because most of the jobs are like web or mobile or whatever. Like this was the only job that had that, which gave me the chance to flex those skills that I had, um, that I had like practiced. Um, but yeah, it's not AAA games, which was my goal, but it's something. Like I was making a step towards that direction, and I was gaining experience that I could add to my CV. So in this company, I got to work on a C-based graphics engine, which was used on cars, like on the car dashboards. It was a automotive rendering engine from Japan. So I got to work with like clients based in Japan, and um, I got to create a bunch of new techniques for that engine. I got to work with their programmers and our programmers, and yeah, I got to collaborate with them. And I got to work on a bunch of other projects in Europe and a bunch of local things. So I got to work on like different types of graphics. Like I got to work on desktop graphics, mobile graphics, web graphics, and all that stuff. So it was a decent mix of everything. It was not games, but it was close enough. I got to do some professional graphics experience. So I got some C++, OpenGL experience, all that stuff, which was not bad for like my second job. Of course, doing a job that's related to graphics didn't mean I stopped working on my personal projects. On the contrary, I kept working on them to improve my knowledge. I focus more on the deeper topics like shading and lighting theory and understanding the GPU, the GPU hardware architectures, and also trying to learn other graphics APIs like Vulkan and DirectX 12. So these are newer, more modern graphics APIs, which are closer to the hardware. So it's like you are trying to write the driver. It's similar to writing a driver. It's very low level, and that's what we at AMD recommend that game developers use. So it's a very new technology that will help you get more jobs, basically, in the graphics industry. So because of that, like I started to learn those as well. And as you can see, my engine was starting to look even more impressive now. Like there was more effects. There was there was fog. There was depth of field. There was like soft shadows. There was animation. All that stuff. Like I was keeping, working on like more features to my engine and making it look much better, which will look more impressive on my CV. So that's why. So during this time, I decided that maybe I should start to apply for jobs in the games industry since I had been working like around 1 year in Lightroom, which gave me 1 year professional graphics programming experience, and over 3 years of working on personal projects as well since like 2015 by that point. So I think I might have applied for like over 50 jobs, but I kept getting like rejected from all of them. That's either because I lacked the experience, the professional experience, or because they weren't willing to like bear the cost of visa sponsorship for like a junior candidate. So these were all like game studios, which is fair because like not everyone is willing to invest on like a junior, to like spend that much money on a junior. Um, yeah, so because of that, I didn't really get any interviews, but I eventually got an interview at Google for joining the Stadia team in Canada. Stadia, if you're not familiar, is their cloud streaming thing that they did for gaming. It was a terrible, terrible project. Like, I don't really understand why they did it. Cloud streaming, like, doesn't really work, makes sense if you don't have fast internet, and they had a terrible business model. It's a failed project, in my opinion. But I interviewed for it. They had a Vulkan-related graphics programming role there, so I interviewed. I actually prepped a long time for it. I think I prepped for like a month for that interview. But I think I got through the first one, but in the second round, the technical round, I failed miserably because it was like an interview where you have to code on a uh, Google Docs document. So you didn't have any any IntelliSense or like code snippets or whatever like that. Like it was so stupid. Like you wouldn't want to program on a like text editor, right? Like a plain text editor, not like Visual Studio Code or something. So it didn't make any sense to me. But like I'm typically very bad at those kinds of interviews where you have like those lead code style questions. Like that's completely not in not it's not related to the job that I'm doing. Like I was not asked a single question, which made no sense to me. But yeah, I didn't pass that interview, so I failed that miserably. So I just gave up for the time being, went back to working on my portfolio and playing with my band. Um, so in the early in the year 2019, towards I think like January or February, I was contacted by a recruiter at Imagination Technologies. So this was a company in the UK, which is a hardware IP company that designed the GPUs for the Sega Dreamcast and the PlayStation Vita and the iPhones. So the role was in their OpenGL. So like this company, is a hardware IP company, which means they don't actually build the hardware, they just design the hardware and they give it to companies like Apple or PlayStation or whatever, and they will take that and they will build the hardware. So they will sell the IP, which is the design of the hardware. So yeah. So the job that I was offered was in their OpenGL ES driver team. And unfortunately, drivers were not my specialty. So I bombed that interview as well. It's mainly because I didn't have that like low level C knowledge, which they were looking for. I was more of a C++ programmer, like at the game engine level. Like I was like a game engine programmer essentially. However, once I got that call saying that I failed the interview, I quickly went on their careers page and I saw that there was another job which had like which had like a requirement that fit my skill set, and it seemed like the kind of job that I wanted to do. So I quickly shot an email to the recruiter saying, "Hey, there's a job on your careers page that I feel like is better suited for me. Could you put me in touch with the person who's doing it?" And she set me up with an interview. And so yeah, I did the initial screening call. It like went really well. It seemed like the kind of job that I wanted to do. Then I passed the technical round, went really well. It was the kind of skill level that fit my skills. And then I passed the final technical interview and the HR interview, and they extended a job offer to me, which I accepted. And so I got hired as a developer technology engineer, which meant that I had finally gotten my foot in the door of the graphics industry, which is a huge like achievement when you're trying to specialize, because now I've finally gotten into the industry that I wanted. And this was like a huge achievement for me. And so after this, the company, they paid for my tickets, they paid for me to move there, sponsored my visa, They put me in a hotel for 2 weeks till I found an apartment. They got all that sorted out for me. It was very nice. Yeah, it was actually a really good experience for me. And yeah, so that was my first time working in a different country as well. So as a developer technology engineer, we mainly worked with game developers to help them optimize their games to run best on our GPUs, which were called Power VR GPUs, which are made by Imagination Technologies, and they were used on iPhones till I think the iPhone 7 or the 8, I can't remember. But yeah, so like we mainly worked on the Android side. Oh yeah, and we also maintained the public Power VR SDK, which is like an SDK used to which developers can use to build like graphics like applications from. It's like it serves as a framework, and it also has a bunch of graphics samples to learn from. And the best part of the job was that I was no longer the expert. So I got to learn so much from my teammates and my boss and my seniors and everyone, because in Lightroom, I was the only graphics expert. So like I had to teach everyone else. Like there was no way for me to learn except from the internet. But here, like everyone else had way more experience than me. So like I had a wealth of more experienced people at my disposal that I could pull from, and I could learn so much from them, which was a very good experience. Like I got to learn so much. Like I gained so much like experience from those folks. And I also got to work on like actual serious code bases, like real games, like Fortnite and PUBG Mobile. So like I'm not a fan of mobile games, but they were games and they were graphics for games. So it's close enough, right? So I also got to attend industry events, which is very important for building contacts that will come in handy down the line, like especially when you're looking for a job. So that was very good to have. So despite all of this experience and actually working in the graphics industry, I still didn't reach that goal of like working on AAA PC and console graphics, right? Like I don't like mobile games. Like my phone doesn't have a single game on it. I've never played mobile games in like 10 years. I don't find them interesting. But like the job was still satisfying because I got to work on graphics, but I didn't like those games that I was working. So I didn't really become complacent. I kept working on my portfolio like even after I joined this company. So I kept working, and I tried to focus on areas that I didn't touch at work. So like different areas of graphics. Like for example, like I focus at home, like I focus more on high-end graphics techniques, because at work we work on like like efficient graphics, like power efficient chips for phones. So they are very low power devices, so you can't really run those very high-end graphics on them. These days you can get quite close because there are some very good phones now, but it's still not, it's like a fraction of the power you have on like a PC or a PlayStation 5 or a Xbox Series X, right? So it's not what I wanted. So what I did was in my spare time, I think I spent roughly like 1 year doing like personal research during COVID, actually. So during COVID, once we went into lockdown, I was stuck in my own like apartment for like 2 years. So I basically like just took that time to do some research, and I did a little project, this research project where I was integrating ray tracing into a traditional game pipeline, like a game graphics pipeline. So as I said before, ray tracing is a way to have more realistic graphics than traditional game graphics. Like it's the way that films have been rendered, like films like Avatar 2 or the recent Disney Pixar movies. Those are all done using ray tracing. So that's a very realistic technique, but it's very expensive. So since NVIDIA's RTX GPUs came out, that has been possible in real time for games, but it's very expensive to do. So I did this project where like I wanted to research like what's the best way you can integrate ray tracing into typical game graphics. So I created a project where you have a traditional game renderer, and I would integrate those ray tracing techniques. And this is what it looks like. Yeah, so here's some screenshots. So this contains a lot of ray trace effects, such as the shadows. Like, for example, the soft shadows you can't really get without ray tracing. So this is all done using ray tracing. The reflections, which you can't really see here, but you can in the next few screenshots. And also it features techniques like ambient occlusion and global illumination, which are just basically simulations of light being bounced in the scene. It's a technical term. We don't really need to go into details, but yeah, there's a bunch of techniques here. So this is like the biggest project that I worked on while I was at Imagination Technologies. So here's a few more screenshots. You can see the reflections better on the walls and on the screws on the ground. This was a scene built by EA Games, I think. Their Pika Pika demo or whatever. This was a demo they released in 2018 called Pika Pika. So this was the same scene. And this shows a better view of the shadows. You can see how soft they get as the pillars get further from the light. Yeah, so I released this project on GitHub in late 2021, and I wrote a massive blog post that went into detail about all the techniques and all of my findings. And I then shared this blog post and the project in Twitter and LinkedIn, and it went viral quite a bit. Like, it was shared quite a lot, and that caught the attention of a lot of the industry peers. And they gave me a lot of good feedback and lots of good comments. And this project actually ended up becoming a reference of many other projects, such as the Godot game engine. Like, they use this as reference for their research into adding ray tracing for the engine, so which I'm very proud of. Anyways, this project ended on the radar of my former colleague of mine, who used to work with me at Imagination Technologies. Then she left to join AMD. And she thought I'd be a great fit for her team and recommended me to her the hiring manager of the role. So I applied for that job at AMD, of course. The first interview was just a pleasant chat. Just talked about graphics and what I liked, what they offered, so on. And then the technical interview came around, and it ended up becoming another like a high level graphics like technical discussion. Like I was not asked any like coding tests or like lead code tests or anything. And why is that? It's because my portfolio did the talking. So they had seen all of my personal research that I had done, and they knew of my coding skills, which I am very thankful for. So that interview was actually very easy, because there were just like some questions about Vulkan, DirectX, or whatever, but it was mostly very like a chill chat. And eventually, I did get the job at AMD as a senior software engineer in the core technology group, which is responsible for doing the graphics like research and development work. So finally, I reached the goal I had set for myself 7 years ago at that point. So it's about 9 years ago now. But yeah, I got to work on graphics technology for AAA games. And I even got to go, as you saw from the photo on the first slide, that I got to go to the Game Developers Conference and present a technology like that had been a dream of mine since I was a kid, because that's where all the game developers go to present their findings and their technologies and stuff. And I actually got to go for the first time as a speaker. Like, I actually got to go and speak there, and I got to share like the project that I was working on. And that was all thanks to this job. So yeah, it's a dream come true for me to be able to work at AMD. And you get to be at the forefront of technology, of like graphics technology. You get to work on the bleeding edge of graphics. And yeah, it's a very satisfying job to be like this specialized. yeah, so like, okay, so after you reach this goal, what do I do now, right? Well, this typically you can specialize even further if you want. Like you can be an expert on like a very specific part of this field. So in the context of graphics, it could be like doing research into ray tracing or upscaling or post processing, for example, some kind of very niche area. Like there are, like for example, like I have friends who are in the graphics industry who do like they've been doing research into like upscaling for like 10 years or whatever. They've mastered that area and they publish papers and all that stuff. Like you actually could go down into one specific topic, or you could stay as a generalist. So you know a bit of everything, so you can quickly jump into whatever is needed. And in my case, I actually prefer being more of a general graphics programmer. So I get to work on a bit of everything. Like in my career, I've done, since I joined AMD, like my first project was FSR2 or Fidelity Effects Super Resolution 2, which, as I said, was a technique for upscaling graphics. I started with that. I did Brixelizer, like I was the technical lead for Brixelizer, which was kind of like ray tracing. So I did a bit of that. I did worked on other top secret projects I can't talk about yet, things like that. So I get to work on all sorts of different things, and I'm enjoying that right now. So, yeah, you can be a generalist or a special, like a you can be you can have a niche within a niche, or you can be a bit more of like a general programmer, which I am. So, regardless of that, you can make moves that are more like lateral within the industry, right? You can join other companies in the same industry that will give you whatever challenge you are looking for. So if you are not getting the challenge you want, you can move to a different company and do the same job there. Since you're now established in the industry, changing jobs is not going to be hard. But it's good to stay at one place for a few years so you can rack up the experience and like you can make a meaningful contribution. Because if you keep changing jobs, you're not going to stay at the company for long enough to actually make something like that's meaningful, like a bigger, like a publication or like a bigger project or whatever. You're not going to have that time, right? So, but most importantly, keep on keep on learning new things, because knowledge is one of the most important things that makes you a specialist, right? So keep on adding to that knowledge and staying up to date with your industry and keeping your skills sharp. So read blog posts, read research papers, go to conferences, meet with people, share your knowledge, do all that stuff. Stay up to date. So, what is it that I want you to take away from this session? Well, mostly that you should keep trying to learn new things, especially on your own. You might just find your calling, like the thing that makes you feel, damn, like I would love to do this thing for a living, that feeling. You got to find that. Like you have to find what works for you, and you can't do that without trying new things, trying to learn new things, and being curious. That's what you have to be. Next, you should build up a portfolio of personal projects. This is how you stand out. Like especially as us Sri Lankans, we have to stand out. And it's very important to bridge the gap if you don't have the relevant experience, like in your professional, career. Like if you are like missing like a bit of like experience, you can fill that gap using your personal projects. You can do some self-studying, and you can build some personal projects that you can add to your portfolio to extend your CV, basically. And also, you should network with other people in that field that you want to join. You can share your work with them on social media like Twitter or LinkedIn, so on, and take whatever chances you get to attend conferences or events that are relevant to the industry you're interested in. It could lead to a job, because that's how you make connections. Like all the industry things that I've been to have been great places to land a job. Also, keep taking steps towards your dream job. Like don't be complacent and just stay at one job for the rest of your life. I mean, if you want to pursue like a niche, keep making changes, like keep trying to get closer and closer to your goal. If you think a certain job will help you gain experience in some skill that's needed by your field, but isn't directly related to it, still consider taking it. It might uh, give you the edge. Like it might make your skills better, or may give you the experience you might not have gotten otherwise. And finally, don't be discouraged by failure. Everyone goes through it. I've gone through it. You all will go through it at some point. So just keep applying for jobs. And if you don't get it, just pick yourself back up and keep trying. One of those will work out. Trust me, that happens. That's totally fine. Um, but yes, that concludes my talk. Thank you all very much for listening. And good luck to you all. And I hope you all find your own niche if that is what you're looking for. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them now. If you're shy, you can just send me an email. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gihara, for that valuable session. I hope that everyone here got inspired and will have been motivated enough to pursue a career in maybe in like graphic designing and everything. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop in the chat, and if you want, you can